So you've done the Blender portion of your custom model, and now you're ready to get started on the Unity setup. The first thing you need is VRChat Creator Companion. This walks you through the process to install Unity and helps you get everything ready for you. The only other thing you need to install prior to getting started is Poyomi. So once you get to the Poyomi website, click on Add to VCC and follow the process to add it to your Creator Companion. And now you're ready. If you watched the first video, you are already familiar with the Blender portion. You've already taken your pre-existing assets and put them all together, ideally ones that are already rigged to that base, and you don't have to do any sculpting. Import a mesh, combine armatures, combine meshes together, you're done, right? Really simple. Now we're gonna move on to the Unity portion, which can be easy. A lot of it is just click this, click this, click this, and over time you memorize it. So you need Creator Companion, you need Poyomi Toon. If you're gonna make your Avatar Quest compatible, this is not in the guide. I can make a video on it if anyone wants it, but you'll need VRC Quest tools if you wanna do that. You'll need Gesture Manager if you want to test your avatar in Unity to make sure all of your toggles work. That is really all you need. Once you've imported all of that, open your project up. In your Unity project, you will want to import your FBX. I personally create a folder called Avatar and I'll put the FBX in there. Once your FBX is in the project, click on the FBX and in the Inspector tab, you need to click on the Rig tab. Change the animation type from generic to humanoid and apply. This will take a few seconds. Once it's done, click on the Configure button and then you need to add the chest bone. My chest bone is already in there, but always assume that it's not going to be in there. Add the chest bone, and then in the head section, delete the jawbone. This is something you want to do for every avatar. More than likely, it'll put a hair bone in the jawbone, and the chest bone will have nothing in it. These two things need to be done every time. Once you've applied that, I personally go ahead and save a scene here. This is where things start to differ. You'll find everyone does it a little different. You could make brand new materials for everything you need, but for a faster process, I personally like to tell the FBX to create its own materials. So in the Materials tab, click the drop down for location and select Use Materials Legacy. And then the one below it, From Models Material, and below that, Local Materials folder, and apply. Doing this will create a material for every material that you had in Blender with the proper names set. So if your shirt was named shirt from the asset creator, then it'll create a material called shirt. It'll create a new folder in your assets section called your avatar.fbm. I like to name that to textures. And then I'll go into the textures folder, and this is where I'll drag in all of the textures that I got from the assets. And then in the materials folder, I select all of the materials, and then in the top right of the inspector, I change the material to Poyomi Toon. With all of the materials selected, I set all of them to base settings that I use for every material. I always use a very slight reflections and specular, a multiplied gray. Even if I don't use any other settings for material, just these two things will improve the quality of the shader. If you remember from part 1, I set the hair to blue just so it wouldn't be so much of an eyesore, but by creating the materials from the FBX, now the hair material is blue. So with all of the materials selected, I click on the color and change it back to white. Now I click on the drop down for rim lighting. I'm going to set it to a gray. It doesn't have to be any specific gray, just a gray, and then change add to multiply. Click on the drop down for reflections and specular, and then this doesn't have to be exact either. I just eyeball the smoothness to the same spot every time and the specular visibility to the same spot every time. You don't want to have anything in your metallic or your reflection visibility. After doing the rim lighting and the reflections and specular, while all of the materials are still selected, scroll all the way down to the material and expand the rendering tab. On the cull option, I change it from back to off. This is mandatory, honestly, because a lot of meshes will save poly count by having the inside invisible and by having the shader set the culling to off, the inside won't be invisible anymore. And just by doing that, the shaders look a lot better. Obviously, we need some textures in there, so I'm going to hide all of the meshes so I can do one at a time. If I click on the body mesh after hiding all of them, I go to the inspector and drop down the material. I'm looking at the head material right now and looking for the head texture in my textures folder under the assets section. I'm going to drag the head texture into the texture slot, which is the very first square under the material. A lot of these assets, especially the higher quality ones, come with a bunch of other textures and masks. Normals, rim mask, outline mask, glitter mask, as you can see here. And I could go into detail about that, but just to do the bare minimum to get the avatar uploaded and everything works good, you don't need to use any of this. It might be overwhelming right now. Just set your sights on getting the texture in there in the first place. You don't even have to do the rim lighting and the reflections and specular. I just think that doing those two things alone will heighten the quality of the avatar exponentially. But don't worry about the rest if it's too much. I did want to show in this case, the head came with extra eye textures. They are separate from the head. In the eye section, you can see that the background is completely white and it comes with a variety of the eye textures. So I did want to quickly go over that in case you ran into the same thing and you want to quickly change your eye color. So I created a decal with replace. Because you have a white mask under the eyes, you can't replace it with white. Because you're replacing it with a transparent, nothing's gonna happen. It's only gonna replace the eye color. And instead of having the default blue eyes, I have pinkish reddish ones. I'm gonna move on to the emote material that's in here now. Your asset texture might call it alpha, transparent, expressions, emotes. You're looking for something like that. Sometimes it might even still be the head texture. You might just try a few textures and see which one works. The important part is you need to set the shader to transparent. Then I'm going to go to the body and add the body texture in there as well. Now all of the body has the textures as they should. And I did add a texture here. This is a free panda-based texture that I found. So I'm going to do the same thing that I did with the eyes and enable the decal with the replace option. And because it's a transparent, you can't replace anything on it, so it only adds the black tattoo on it and leaves the skin color as is. The tattoo also came with an emission, so if you scroll down to the emission section, you drag the emission into the emission map and you set the emission strength. I think a 0.6 is personally a great middle ground. I also want to go over texture compression. So by default, after every texture I add to a mesh, I'm going to select all of the textures that I just added and check use crunch compression and apply that. I leave it 2K for the body, but everything else I will try to do 512, and if it ends up being a bit blurry, then I'll set it to 1K. Try to avoid 2K textures and greater if you can. If you leave it 4K unchecked compression, then you will end up having a massive avatar. It takes forever to download. And again, I do this after every mesh that I work on just to make sure I don't forget any. Now that I'm done with the body mesh, I'm going to move on to the next mesh, which is the ears. So I unhide the ears. It has metal on the mesh, so I go ahead and drop down the metal material and scroll down to the matte cap section. Expand the matte cap section, and I believe Poyomi actually comes with a metal shader, a metal texture that you can use. I personally have one that I just use as a go-to. If you don't have one on standby, click on the little circle to the left of the word matte cap and it'll pull up a box that you can type into and just type metal and select one of the textures that Poyomi gives you. This will give you a very easy metal effect without having to do much work. There's definitely ways to improve it, but it's good enough. The cat ears, the ears have the texture now, so I do the same thing for the hair. I unhide the hair. The hair did not come with a texture. However, it does use CC's textures. A lot of hairs nowadays will link you to CC's hair textures, but it's so popular that you can actually just Google CC's hair textures. I'll put a link down below as well. CC's and Wet Cat's are the two #1 hair textures, UV wraps and whatnot, and CC's is amazing because you get the alpha that gives you fake extra strands. It is really good stuff. So yeah, you could just put in a basic hair texture that's just a square, but CC's is amazing. So if your hair is UV wrapped to CC, I recommend you use that. Just keep in mind that the fake strands, the cutout effect, is not Quest compatible. So same thing on the hair, I'm going to drag the texture in, and the CC's hair textures also come with a normal, so I'm going to put that in the normal map as well. The normal maps will always be that blue, and it comes with an emission, so I'm going to scroll down to the emission section, set it to 0.6, set the emission color to white, and drag it into the emission map. And then once I have it the right strength, I'm going to change the color to that sort of pink that I'm going for right now. My hair came with a second material on it for some extra highlights, so I went and grabbed another hair texture, and I did the same thing. I put the hair in the texture slot, added the normal map. Now, since I had those two materials, I'm going to select both of them at the same time, and so I don't have to do it twice, and change the opaque to cutout. This part was a little repetitive, so I just sped it up where I am adding all of the textures on the meshes. I tried a few of the sock textures and I didn't end up liking any of them. I kept the normal map and then I changed the color in alpha to the color I wanted instead of having stripes on my socks. Moving on now to the sweater. Now when I put the sweater's normal map texture in, it ended up looking really bad. I don't know if I did something wrong there. I tried both of them because it came with two. Not sure what happened. Whenever I have normals go wrong, or some assets don't even give you normals, and I want that sort of cloth effect, I have a specific cloth texture that I use for every occasion, but you can just Google cloth normal maps and find one. Just about any of them should work. If the normal map did work, I'd click on the drop down on the normal map and change the tiling to get slightly bigger at a time until I'm happy with the size, because it'll be really big at first. I used the one that I found just now, but when I dragged it in, the same thing happened. So I don't think it's the normal map that's the issue. I think there's something wrong with the mesh. So I'm going a different route and changing the material to black. I don't want it to be this void black though, so my go-to there, if the texture doesn't work at all, I add glitter. Now with glitter, if you look down on glitter angle range, turn that down, set the speed to 0 so it doesn't look like TV static. And I was just playing around here and I ended up loving it. If you select random colors, then it gives you a rainbow vibe. I thought that made it a lot more interesting. Under the rim lighting section, change the multiply to add and then enable the invert rim. This will put the lighter part on the inside rather than the outside, and then I turn down the blend mode until it's the right brightness that I'm happy with. Now, once you have all of the materials on the model, this is where I apply the blend shapes. So you can see the skirt is clipping into the tank top because the blend shape has not been applied yet. Click on the mesh, under the inspector tab, click on the drop down for blend shapes. I'm going to go on the body first and scroll all the way down to the bottom, just look for the ones that you made and set all of those to 100. And then I move on to the rest of the meshes. Every mesh that I made a blend shape for, I'm going to click on that mesh, click the drop down for blend shapes, and enable that shape key that I made. If you caught there, I did add another blend shape for the tank top because there ended up being clipping there. I do want to preface here, there's no actual specific order for anything. You could do anything in any order. You could literally do, animation work while your avatar is still completely white from having no materials on it. This is just the order that I personally do things. Now that the blend shapes are done, I will click on the model itself in the hierarchy, and in the inspector, I add a component. The component I'm going to add is the VRC Avatar Descriptor. I'm going to quickly run through all of this and just kind of slow it down if you end up needing to. Once I've created the Avatar Descriptor, on the eye position, you want to hit edit. You should see, as long as you have the little world tool right here enabled, you should see that. If you don't, then you need to enable it. So use the arrows to drag that white ball down, and you want to put it between your eyes. This is also opinion based. Some people put it in the middle of the head. Some people put it right between the eyes, a little bit in front of the nose. Just kind of play with that. See where you want to put it. I personally keep it toward the front of the head. I auto detect the lip sync, which should fill in all of those automatically just like it did here. I enable the eye look and set the eye bones to left eye and right eye. For the rotation states, I personally found a good medium for 15. You might prefer less or you might prefer more, but look up is negative, look down is positive on the X, and look left is negative and look right is positive on the Y. For the blend shape states for the eyelids, I set the blink to blink, obviously. And some heads come with their own blend shapes for look up and look down. It might add an extra effect where the eyelids themselves move, but you technically don't have to put anything in there. You could leave those as none. Now that I've done the descriptor, this is where I move on to Phys Bones. Now, Phys Bones, there's no wrong way to do them. You can set a generic Phys Bone and leave it completely default. It is okay. Personally, I have specific settings for every kind of mesh, and you can find those Phys Bone settings in my Discord. I have pictures showing how to get those settings. If you want flowy long hair, if you want bouncy ears, a very springy tail, a very simple tail, big boobs, small boobs, big butt, small butt. It's a great resource, and as soon as I find new settings or have a new thing that I need new settings for and I just have to go find it myself, I then want to share it with you guys. So please make use of that resource. Join my Discord, get those Phys Bone settings. It'll be a lot of help here. So that's exactly what I'm doing here. So I've expanded the armature and the hips to get to the butt root. It could be called anything but related. So I click on that bone and then I click add component. I'm going to type in Phys Bone and select that. And this is, it looks, on first glance, it does look very overwhelming, but I'm going to copy the exact settings that I have on my Discord. And then I repeat this for everything. I do it for the boobs, the tail, the ears, and the hair in this scenario. I have settings for all of those in my Discord, so I'm just going to quickly run through all of that while I match those settings from my Discord. The tailbone, it's a good habit to get into to not put the Phys Bone settings on the first tailbone. You want to put it on the second tailbone. So if I were to put the Phys Bone setting on the first bone for the tail would just fly around, not even attached to the tailbone. So in most cases, it's a good habit to put it on the second bone of the tail. Now that I've done all of the Phys Bones, I'm going to go into play mode for the first time to test out how the Phys Bones move. I'll drag the avatar around and it looks pretty good. The hair moves a little slow looking at it now, but it's all up to personal taste. Again, there's really no wrong way to do Phys Bones. So no matter what you do, whatever, it works. Now that I have done all of that, it is time to move on to the animations. There's not going to be many animations here because I'm not doing any toggles. I could, but that is not what I'm focusing on this tutorial. So I'm going to create an FX layer from the hands layer that the VRC samples gives you. So if I scroll down in the list here, I'm looking for packages. And in the packages folder, I'm looking for this file location here, VRChat SDK avatars, samples, AV3 demo assets, animation, controllers. I will mention that VRChat does update this stuff regularly, so by the time you're watching this, it could be labeled completely different stuff. Just know that you're looking for something sample related. Examples maybe. You're looking for VRC avatars v3 hands layer 2. I'm going to click on that and then duplicate it, rename it to FX, and then drag it into your assets folder. Then back in the avatar descriptor, I'm going to scroll down again to playable layers and click on the default FX layer. It'll change it to none runtime animator controller, and I'm dragging that new FX controller that I just created into that slot. If I double click that slot, it'll have all parts left hand and right hand. I personally don't put expressions on the left hand. I only put it on the right hand. If you want it on the left hand, just do the exact opposite of what I'm doing. I set the weight on the left hand to 0. Setting it to 0 keeps it from being activated essentially. On the right hand option, I'm deleting the mask. So I need to create animations for those expressions. In the main assets folder now, I will right click and at the top hover over create and click on folder. I'll rename this folder to expressions and go into it, right click again, create, and click on animation. Once I've named the first one, I will press Control D to duplicate it, and then right click and rename all of these one at a time. Control D, rename, and such until I get 7. Because I am an index controller user, I end up doing fist a lot as my idle hand. So I leave fist empty, and by empty I mean I put the fist in both the idle and the fist slot. Now on each of these I will click on the box and put the corresponding animation that I just made in the motion section under the inspector. Now that I've done that, I'll go back to the scene, right click on my model in the hierarchy and duplicate it. If I move it to the side, I now have 2 of them. Now I'll find the FX that I made and drag it into that duplicated model that I just created. Under the animation tab, this is where I will create the expressions using the blend shapes that were made for the head. Now I will select the default, and in the inspector, I expand the blend shape section. I click on the red dot, which enables recording, and any blend shape that I activate or deactivate right now will add it to that animation. So I'm scrolling down and looking for any sort of blend shapes that might add to expressions. So anything that is eye closing, winking related, any mouth movement like smile, smirk, frown. You have to set it to a number first and then to 0, so that's why I'm clicking somewhere in the middle before I drag it back down. And I'm just scrolling through and looking at anything that could be emotion related that I might want as an expression. Now if you look down here, it is absolutely filled with all of those blend shapes that I just made. I'm going to click on one of them and Control A to select them all, and then Control C to copy them. Now I will paste them into every animation that I created. The fist, gun, open, peace, point, rock and roll, and thumbs up. So I'll go to the fist now and I'll paste that in. And now to add the expressions that I want, I will scroll through that. And for the open hand, I'm looking for some sort of open smile, happy blink and whatnot. And I will set those to 100. And I'll just kind of play around with this until I end up with the expressions that I want. You could set them to 30 if maybe like a smile is just way too big. You don't have to set it to 100. You can scale it to whatever looks good for you. And because of how much of this is repetition, I'm going to quickly go through and do all of these. The piece, I was trying to create some sort of lip pucker, cutesy, flirty look. I'm not a fan of the tongue out personally, but that's where most people would put the tongue out if they wanted that. Rock and roll, I was trying to make some sort of angry expression. Point, I usually do sad or surprised. And once I've done all of those, I will delete the duplicate, the clone that I created earlier. These were the only things I was doing to the FX layer. If you didn't want expressions at all, you did not have to do any of that FX process. You could have left it completely blank. But now it's time to test the model. Since I added Gesture Manager, I will click on Tools at the top left and click on Gesture Manager. This will add it into the hierarchy for the scene. And in play mode, if I select Gesture Manager, the model goes into a pencil pose where I can see a radial menu on the right. This allows me to test the model, and expressions is obviously grayed out because I didn't add any toggles to the model, it's only the expressions. But it does have the expressions options where I can check mark each individual expression to make sure they look good, make sure I was happy with them. Now, when I was doing part 1, I originally found a collar that I wanted to add and completely forgot about it. So because it's a simple neck bone item, I'm going to add it here instead. I already added it to my assets folder, so if I drag it into this scene, I'm going to use the arrows to line it up to the neck position. I hid the hair here so I could make sure I got it lined up perfectly. You may need to mess around with the sizing tool to lengthen it. Once I've got it in the right spot, I apply the materials. I already made a metal material earlier for the ears, so I'm dragging that into the metal slot on the choker. Now, I did end up getting a little lazy here. I could have made a new material for the collar, but I just put in the same shirt material that I made. Now, just dragging the choker into the hierarchy does not attach it to the avatar. So I will click and hold the choker and let go of it on the neck bone. Now when I move the neck, you can see that the choker is attached. And because I've added the collar, I want to make sure in play mode that the collar is attached properly. In the radial menu for gesture manager, if I click on options and locomotion, I can actually mess with the velocity to move the avatar around and make sure everything is rigged properly. And that's it, everything is done in the model. Do a last little check and make sure that you've reduced all of the textures so they're not sitting all at 2K uncompressed. And now you're ready to get into the testing phase. Click on the VRChat SDK at the top left to get to that control panel, upload the model, and get it tested to make sure there's no clipping. In the control panel, it'll automatically have several warning signs that you need to auto-fix. So go ahead and click on auto-fix on all of those. Give your avatar a name, set the thumbnail, make sure you hit capture. Hit that check mark on the bottom on online publishing, and you're ready to get it uploaded. Your avatar is all done. And this is extremely basic shader work. If you want to improve it at all and you have no idea where to start, my TikTok is entirely filled with tips on how I improve my avatar, how I learn new things, and show the process on how to fix issues that you might not have known how to fix, how to improve things like skin shaders so it's not just a simple skin texture and nothing else, and how to do really shiny metal instead of the simple matte cap. If that stuff interests you, go check out my TikTok. And thank you for watching. I hope I helped you guys understand how to make an avatar a little bit better.